Welcome everybody for this Brazil Week number 7. Yes, we are very, very happy and proud of having the Brazil Week for 7 years already at King's Brazil Institute. And this year in particular, we are extremely happy because this Brazil Week also celebrates the 10th anniversary of Brazil Institute at King's College London. We had a lot of plans to celebrate this 10th anniversary last year, but of course, as we all understand, and you probably all notice and know, Brazil and all the world is facing the limitations of the pandemics and the crisis that it breaks together with it. But even that we could not have the celebrations as we would like to have, we still have lots of reasons to celebrate this 10th anniversary of Brazil Institute. And we are doing that because that has been a great achievement for everyone who dedicates to the study of Brazil, who dedicates to the knowledge of Brazil, and especially to the dialogue with Brazilian academics and scholars all over the world. In 2020, during this 10th anniversary of Brazil Institute, we have also some transformations inside Brazil Institute. And I was made director of the Institute. Those who don't know me, I am Dr. Vinicius Mariano de Carvalho. I joined the Institute in 2014, after a few years working in Denmark in the University of Aarhus, also teaching Brazilian studies. So I am the new director of the Institute, not so new to the Institute anymore. I joined, as I said, in 2014, and I had the privilege of work under the leadership and mentorship of Professor Anthony Pereira, who was the founder of Brazil Institute and director for 10 years of the Institute. Professor Anthony Pereira did a terrific job with the Institute, and it's a huge responsibility to take the role of director after him. It is a responsibility to keep the reputation of King's Brazil Institute in UK and globally, and to keep the high standards that Anthony set for the Institute during this period. It's a huge, huge responsibility and challenge in a period that we are living of contraction to find ways to expand the Institute. It's also very, very challenging in periods where people are having difficulties to think about tomorrow, that we set up some agenda to think about the future, to think about 10 years ahead of us, to think about the 20th anniversary of Brazil Institute and the legacy that we will leave for the new directors that the Institute will have in this future, legacies that will leave to King's College London, to UK, and to Brazil. So for these 10th years of Brazil Institute and this transformation that we are passing through, we have some new plans for the Institute, of course. Some of those plans are related to our research agenda. We are consolidating research clusters inside Brazil Institute that will help to put together in groups to concentrate energy and efforts in specific subjects and topics of expertise of our people in Brazil Institute. So for this, we will have done in Brazil Week, one event on Friday in which we will present our research clusters and some of the people that are working in specific topics there. So please look in our agenda and go there. We'll be looking a lot in some key areas for Brazil in this current context and also for the future. We'll be looking a lot in environmental issues, in democracy and governance, in security and defense, and also in a very important point, we will join King's College London in this work in decolonizing the curricula. We'll be joining the King's College London in ways that Brazil can contribute to think differently what's going on in the world today and those epistemological contributions that can make a big difference for us. So we also are consolidating this year the creation of Anti-Brazilian Studies series, a book series in which we are publishing under the coordination of my coordination, Brazil Institute. We are publishing scholarship material and work of good scholars all over the world. On this week, we also have an event to launch this book series and the 3 first volumes that have been published in 2020 already. We also are very proud of keeping Brasiliana, the Journal for Brazilian Studies, as an incredible platform of publishing articles by people from all over the world on Brazilian related topics. This journal was created in 2012 at University of Aarhus and came together with me to King's, and now is directed by Dr. Felipe Botelho. Well, this research would never be possible without partnerships, without collaborations. And we should mention some of those collaborations and partnerships here. First, with our Brazilian partners, and the first we should mention is the University of São Paulo. With this university, we have a joint PhD program for already 7 years. This joint PhD program had produced doctors that are in academia, are in the public and private sector today, bringing the name of Brazil Institute and the work that we do in collaboration with the University of São Paulo for many parts of the world. We are very proud of this partnership, and Brazil Institute would be not what it is today without this collaboration. We also highlight the partnership with the University of Minas Gerais, Federal University of Minas Gerais. We are looking very carefully at the program that they established a few years ago, called Traditional Knowledge. I think that's a fantastic way of really decolonizing curricula, and many other Brazilian universities with which we had in the past many collaborations and in the present too. We also have collaborated with, let's say, ways of applying our research in practical contribution or in outreach outside the university environment. So I could mention our recent partnership with Rebrapaz, the Brazilian Network for Research in Peace Operations, established last year, and we will host also one event in Brazil Week this year with Rebrapaz. With the British Council, this year we are very happy to set up and establish the Science, Technology, Engineering, Mathematics Education Hub, a partnership between Brazil Institute, the Department of Education, and British Council, led by Dr. Arthur Galamba, that has doing a fantastic work. And tomorrow we have the entire day dedicated to the launching of this hub and showing what we want to do with it. We also have good partnerships with the ABERGE, the Brazilian Association for Business Communication. We will be launching a webinar series very soon in February already. And with Revista Problemas Brasileiros, that we have been occupying a space to publish for a broader audience results of the research that we produce here. Inside UK, we also have long-lasting partnerships and collaborations. I should mention with the Oxford University Brazilian Studies Program, led by my friend and colleague, Dr. Andresa Santos, who last year opened our Brazil Week, and the partnership with Canning House and Dr. Cristina Cortes, that has been helping Brazil Institute to build up its platform broadly also in UK. I should mention also the partnership with the Brazilian Navy that is showing a fantastic way of interaction between what the Navy is thinking on strategy for the future and what King's College London can contribute. And of course, also the Brazilian Embassy that has been a partner for quite a long time, and I will talk more about that very soon. We also are trying to make closer and closer to the Brazilian community in UK, and that has been a good way of working together with the Brazilian consulate. The Ambassador Tarcísio has been a good partner also of Brazil Institute, and we have hosted together some events totally directly to the Brazilian community in London, not only those in academia. So I must say that Brazil Institute is not a solitary star. Sorry for those supporters of Botafogo. I'm not mentioning here Botafogo, the Estrela Solitária. But, well, Brazil is not a solitary star, but it's part of constellations. And those constellations, they are what really makes sense, give the meaning for this institute. I should mention, for instance, the constellation of the School of Global Affairs that we are part inside King's College London. We are part of the Global Institutes, India, China, Russia Institute, African Leadership Center. We work very close with them in a master in global affairs. We collaborate also with the geography department in the same school. In the Faculty of Social Science and Public Policy, we can talk a little bit more broadly, and we have thousands of collaborations in the Department of War Studies, in the School of Security Studies, in political economy, and many other departments of our faculty. In the college in general, as I mentioned, collaborations with liberal arts, law school, pharmacology, Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American studies, modern language center, music department, department of education. So you can see that this constellation is getting bigger and bigger. And that's again how we are so proud of being one small star in this constellation, but it helps to give a sense of the presence of Brazil here. Still inside the college with the global engagement team, we are totally in totally cooperation in order to establish and help the bridge between the college and Brazilian institutions. But not only Brazil, we also are thinking in our region. We are also part of this network on Latin American studies in UK and inside King's College London. We are very happy to welcome within Brazil Institute frame this year, the Center for Mexican Studies from UNAM in UK. The center has been in King's for already quite a long time, and they are joining forces with us at Brazil Institute to show more efficiently the presence of Latin American knowledge here inside King's College London. And I thank very much our colleague, Dr. Ana Elena Trevino, director of the Center for Mexican Studies. We have already a colleague coming from there, Berenice Ortega, that will be collaborating with us, and many other Latin American initiatives also inside the college. But not only that, we are also looking to the Lusophonic countries in the world, and especially with our colleagues from the African Leadership Center that has a special attention to the countries of Portuguese-speaking language in Africa. That's again the amplification of our constellation, as I said. To give more visibility to what Brazil Institute is doing for quite a long time, you probably, those who follow us, are seeing that we are trying to show more our people in our Facebook page. We are trying to reanimate and energize our Twitter and LinkedIn page. So please share our posts, comment our posts. Yeah, that's very important for us. That's a way to address an audience that normally would not know what we are doing here. We also create a blog from Brazil Institute that's very soon, it's already there getting publications by our students in a blog language, and very soon you can see it in our web page of Brazil Institute. We are redesigning our Brazil Institute web page where you can see much more of what I'm saying here. We also are very happy to launch the 10th year report. You will see on our webpage, as I said, in a PDF form, and very soon we will also publish in paper, so you could see what has been done in these 10 years of Brazil Institute and our visions for the future here. As part of this process of reorganization, we also rethink a lot in the governance of the Institute. And we have now me as director. We have a deputy director, that's Dr. Felipe Botelho, who's been a fantastic partner for Brazil Institute. He started in SPLAS and now is in the liberal arts department. Is a senior editor, the chief editor of Brasiliana. And as I said, a fantastic friend and collaborator of the Institute inside the college. We also have a new advisory board. We thank a lot the work done by our previous advisory board that for 10 years put Brazil Institute where it is today. And we reframe the advisory board today, trying to reflecting the visions for the future that we have for the Institute and reflecting diversity inequality. This new advisory board is formed by members from UK and from Brazil. From UK, I mentioned Vijay Hangarajan, the former ambassador for UK in Brazil, Cristina Cortes, the CEO of Canning House, Victoria Nabas, a lawyer from the Gunnecourt LLP, fantastic collaborator with the Brazilian community in London also, Vivienne Stern, director of the University in UK International, and Thiago Soares, that until recently was the principal of Royal Ballet. From Brazil, we have Roberta Estrela Dalva, a director, actress, MC, playwright, spoken word artist, slammer, activist, and researcher. We have Professor Sandra Almeida, rector of Federal University of Minas Gerais. Dr. Vigilio Viana, Superintendent of Sustainable Amazonian Foundation, Jackson Schneider, CEO of Embraer Defense and Segurança, and Professor Vahan Agopian, Rector of the University of São Paulo. I already thank them for accepting this collaboration, already thanking them for the work that they start already doing for Brazil Institute. I'm sure that they will help me, advise me, support the work that all together we have to do in the Brazil Institute. And last but not least, also part of this advisory board is the ambassador of Brazil to UK, the Brazilian ambassador to UK, Fred Arruda. The Brazilian embassy to UK in London has been, from the origins of Brazil Institute, one of the most important collaborations that we had here. A supporter, a friend, an institution that believe in what Brazil Institute does and help us a lot, and helped us a lot to arrive where we are, continue to help, and help, I'm sure will help in the future. I will pass the word now to the ambassador, Fred Arruda, to address some words to us in this opening of Brazil Week 2021. Ambassador Arruda.
Thank you, Dr. Vinicius. Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to participate in the opening of the Brazil Week 2021 and to join you in celebrating the Brazil Institute's 10th anniversary. In fact, Professor, the Institute has now gone to its 11th year, which only adds to this celebration. Although we cannot be physically present at King's College London for today's and the coming events of the week, it's quite reassuring that thanks to the wonders of technology, we are still able to gather, albeit virtually. So as we grapple with difficult circumstances brought about by the pandemic, it is probably more important than ever to focus on the ways we can come together to advance academic cooperation and the exchange of knowledge. This virtual Brazil Week is a good example of how we can do just that. Throughout the past 10 years, the Brazil Institute has established itself as a center of excellence for independent academic research with international reach and recognition. It is already an academic reference on all things Brazil, from history to economics, from political science to literature and beyond. More than that, as I like to say, the Institute embodies the notion of Brazil not merely as an object of study. It sees Brazil also as an agent and as a producer of knowledge about itself and the world. And this approach has ensured the presence in the UK of a Brazilian perspective of international affairs and public policy. The Brazil Institute, Professor Vinicius, is a cherished partner of our embassy. Thank you very much for your kind words about our engagement with the Institute. During its decade-long journey, we have closely followed and supported its thriving work. I would like to underscore our appreciation for Professor Anthony Pereira and his central role in the birth and growth of the Institute. Let me once again extend to you, Anthony, our heartfelt gratitude. And let me also reiterate my warm welcome to your successor, Dr. Vinicius de Carvalho, who I'm sure will be more than up to the task. Thank you both and the team for your continued contribution to the Brazil Institute as an independent and increasingly dynamic entity. And of course, our thank you equally to King's College London for their fundamental support of the Institute. As daunting as the current pandemic seems, the rollout of the vaccine is certainly a silver lining. And Brazil is very proud to have taken part in the development of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, I must say. We are confident that this new year will bring with it good tidings and many more opportunities for cooperation. We look forward to working even closer together to promote academic links between Brazil and the UK. To all those attending this week's program, thank you very much for your interest in our country. I wish you have a most fruitful Brazil week. And I wish the Brazil Institute another 10 more years and many more to come. Thank you very much, and back to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your kind words and for the acknowledgement of the work that we have, as well as we need to acknowledge again how much we are thankful and grateful to the support we received from the embassy, from our foundations. No, well, you are probably tired of listening to me already, and I will pass to Professor Anthony Pereira very soon. I just would like to finalize again, extending my gratitude to the advisory board, those who served for the 10 previous years of Brazil Institute, this new advisory board that we are just establishing, starting now. I would like to thank our partners, those who I mentioned already here, and those that I haven't mentioned, but they know that they have been part of the construction of the idea of Brazil Institute, and also our supporters, those who anonymously have given a lot of support for us, among them our audience. People that many times have come into King's to attend our lectures and events, and today are attending this opening event online. I also would like to thank the college leadership who has been supporting the initiative of Brazil Institute, in our acting principal, Professor Evelyn Welsh, and our vice principal international, Professor Fumio Lonizaki, and our until recently former head of school, and now Vice Principal, Professor Brian Perry, the three that have been really supporting us, as well as our head of faculty, Professor Franz Berkhout. I would like to thank our alumni community. Yes, we are very proud of you. You are doing fantastically well, and we are very happy that we have been part of the production and creation and cultivation of your career. I would like to thank our current PhD students. Now, part of is exactly to contribute to your formation also. And I would thank, in the name of the representative of the students, Maisa Edwards, I thank her, and in her name, I thank all of you for everything you have done for King's Brazil Institute and are still doing. I thank also Arthur Galamba and Hannah Brown, who has been working with the establishment of this STEM education with the collaboration with British Council. And lastly, I would like to extend a fantastic thanks to James Bagley and Lucy Willeman. Both of them have been working hardly with me, and last week especially, putting together all this program, making all the invitations, all the announcements. If it was not because of you, this week would be not possible in this moment today. So I will pass not the floor anymore, but the screen and the microphone to my friend, colleague, Professor Anthony Pereira, who will be talking to us about 10 years after the first decade of the Brazil Institute and research in the 2020s. Thank you very much, and Anthony, it's with you.
Thank you, Vinicius. Thanks for all that you're doing for the Brazil Institute. You're doing a great job, and I'm very happy to be part of the Brazil Institute. And thank you, Ambassador, as well, because we have lots of important partners, as Vinicius said, but there's none more important than the Brazilian Embassy in London. You've been a great friend to the Institute, and we will always be grateful for the support that you've provided for us. As Vinicius said, I was director from 2010 to 2020. I'm now a professor in the Institute and in the Department of International Development. And I want to just say a few things about some of the research that's gone on in the Brazil Institute for the last 10 years, because I think sometimes it goes under the radar and we don't pay so much attention to it, even though it really changes the lives of people involved in it, I think. And I hope you'll bear with me for a little while I talk about this, because, you know, as Vinicius said, it's a big community, the Brazil Institute. It's not any one individual's institute. And I'm sure that there are things that I'm going to skip over that other people think are more important, and I'm not trying to say that my own particular vision, my own particular experience is the only one that counts. I would encourage everyone to look at, when it does come out, look at the 10-year report, because there really is an amazing amount of stuff in there in terms of the visitors that we've had, the events that we've put on. And I do think that if I were to have another career, I might, maybe going into business with Vinicius, be a great events planner, maybe even a wedding planner. You know, we could be a kind of duplo sertanejo, Toninho and Vinicius, because we just know how to get it done. This is in the old days, of course, when people actually showed up on campus, but, you know, preparing the wine and the food, making sure that the speakers were all ready. We just had so much experience with that. And you'll see that in the 10-year report. But I'm really looking forward to some of the events in Brazil Week, the event on education, STEM research, the film screening, the Damien Platt's book. And that, in a way, is a good reflection of the Brazil Institute, because it's such a mix. It's like Brazil. It's such a mix. There's humanities, there's social science, there are public events, there are cultural events, there's sort of analysis, social scientific analysis, and it all works. It all sort of comes together. And you'll see in the 10-year report that we've had a lot of distinguished speakers. We've had a comedian. We've had Michael Palin speak about his book. We've had diplomats such as Antonio Patriota, former diplomats, Rubens Recupero. We've had the ambassador speak. We've had, I think, 2 Supreme Court justices. We've had the former head of FUNAI and indigenous leaders. We've had politicians, Marina Silva, Cristóvão Buarque. We've had academics like Matias Spector, Rosana Pinheiro Machado, Jairo Nicolau, Oscar Vilena Vieira. We've had movie stars. We had Camila Pitanga and Leticia Sabatella. Those were very exciting events. But there's one moment that sticks in my mind as this was kind of my Brazil Institute moment. And because we were doing, I think, the first cachaça workshop during Brazil Week. And we had an amazing array of different brands. I think there were 5 different brands of cachaça. And students started making caipirinhas. And as I was standing by the door, I can't remember which room this was in the Strand campus, an elderly gentleman walked into the room, and he looked at this array of cachaça and the caipirinhas being made. And he turned to me and he said, they didn't have this kind of thing when I was a student at King's. And a student who was standing next to him said, well, they didn't have a Brazil Institute when you're at King's, did they? And I remember that, of all these other things that I could have mentioned, that one moment gave me a certain sense of pride in the way that the student spoke up and said, you see, we have this Brazil Institute. But as Vinicius said, I think with the role that we have, there is a certain responsibility, because and I sensed this at the very first event that we organized at the Brazil Institute. I think the Institute was created, as much as anything else, to reflect the multipolar world that was emerging in the 2000s. So if you think about King's sort of normal strengths, or its normal sort of areas of influence, it was very comfortable in the Anglosphere. It was very comfortable in UK, Western Europe, North America, certain parts of Asia, such as Singapore and Hong Kong. But I think there was a sense at the end of the 2000s in King's that the university had to reflect the multipolar world, the global world, in a much better way. And that's why you got these institutes on the Middle East, the African Leadership Center, the Russia, India, China institutes. And I think we have added, along with all those other institutes and along with the departments of international development, geography and global health and social medicine, a little bit of that global element. But going back to that first event, we had an event on the 15th of October, 2010. It was in between the first and the second round of the presidential elections. And the people helping me organize it, they said, well, this is a bit of an arcane topic. You know, maybe we'll get 50 people to show up, because, I mean, it's a Brazilian election. I mean, how many people in London really care about the Brazilian election? We got over 200 people in the Great Hall, and the people who were working with me in the events office, they were quite surprised at the turnout. A lot of the people who came, of course, were Brazilians who had been living in London for quite some time. And then the rest, even though that event was quite a landmark, I spent the rest of the year of 2010-11 going to my colleagues in the university saying, I'm the director of the Brazil Institute. And they would say, oh, that's very nice. What is that? And so I had that process of sort of telling them about it, telling them about the event on the election. And then it was in the following year, it was in the beginning of the 2011 academic year that we were able to hire people and start off our program. But let's reflect a minute too on how exceptional those circumstances were back in 2010. The Brazilian economy grew by 7.5% in 2010. The Economist magazine the year before had said that Brazil was taking off. Foreign investment into Brazil was surging. It had been awarded the Olympic Games in 2009. It was already scheduled to host the World Cup. And you think back to that moment and you think, wow, that was really an incredible moment. Would a university in the UK create a Brazil Institute now? Now, I'm going to leave that to you to think about, but I would say that at the same time that the Brazil Institute was created, there were these kind of BRIC institutes created, the Russia, India, and China Institute, and international views of those countries have changed a lot as well as the changing views of Brazil, the sort of appreciation of the complexity, if you like, of the country, and the recognition of the difficulties that the country faces. So I think one of the things that, as Vinicius has given a sense of in his introductory remarks, part of what we're about is asking sort of big questions about contemporary challenges that Brazil faces. But there's also a lot of partnerships and a lot of engagement with specific entities that have sort of specific interests in what we can do as researchers. So I try to highlight or showcase some of our PhD students' work and our visitors' work in the Brazil Business Brief that is published by the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce. And that's a sort of good way for academics who are often working, just talking to other academics to present their research to a lay audience, an audience that's engaged in business or diplomacy or some other area activity. And sometimes it's difficult to do that. I do think that the social sciences don't always get, and I'm speaking just in my own area. I know that the Brazil Institute is more than social sciences, but in my own area, the social sciences don't always get a lot of respect outside universities or even inside universities, right? Somebody called social sciences the elucidation of the obvious by means of obscure methods. And I know as a parent, I've pretty much failed to convince my own children that social science is relevant. My daughter did biochemistry, and my son is doing economics, but I think he feels that that's the only social science that's worth anything because it's largely quantitative. And I think a lot of the work that gets done in social science, it doesn't necessarily surprise. It's not news. It's as a colleague of mine said, we're in the olds business. We're in the business of confirming long-term trends, like work on urbanization, say. And it doesn't necessarily have the glamour of STEM subjects. It doesn't have the artistic sensibility and subjectivity of the humanities. But I do think that all of these areas are linked. I think they do share some features in terms of the language that they use and what they're trying to do, how they're trying to build knowledge. So if you think of a social scientist who's engaged in regression analysis, he or she is doing something that is something that they do in the STEM subjects, using mathematical reasoning to find correlations. And something that we tend not to admit in social science, but do a lot, is that we engage in storytelling. We use narrative to tell stories about why things happen. And in that sense, we share a lot with the humanities. And I think another reason why social science is having a tough time is that we live in an era of opinions and spin and manipulation and misinformation. There was a 19th century wit who said, "A lie will go around the world while truth is pulling on his boots." And apparently that wasn't Mark Twain. That's another piece of misinformation that goes along with that quote. But somebody said that, and that is still a challenge where people don't necessarily want to know what kind of social scientific research is going on. They're in a bubble of their own. They would rather confirm their own opinion than be challenged in their own opinion. But I think that makes it all the more important that we do some of this research, that we try to go to the roots of things, that we try to challenge conventional wisdom. And we sometimes behave like the irritating child who says, you know, why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? Sometimes social scientists are like that. They're asking questions that everyone else thinks are kind of irritating and basic, but they can help rethink things. So I hope that isn't too long as a prelude, but I wanted to feature some research that our students have done, which I think, which has created this very interesting network in the way that the ambassador was talking about. That what happens with research in a place like King's, where people come here and then they go off to other places, is that you get the building of this very interesting transnational network. So I have to, and I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way, but the first PhD research project in the Brazil Institute was a disaster. And what I meant, actually, it was about a disaster. It wasn't a disaster. It was about the mudslides in the Região Serrana region of Rio de Janeiro in 2011. We had a young guy, Rob Coates, who was very interested in what had happened, how it had happened, how people were exposed to risks. He did most of his research in Nova Friburgo and Teresópolis. And he ended up through his research deciding that although it was a natural disaster, it was partly a social disaster as well, because of the way people had been exposed to the mudslides through the planning process in those towns. And Rob is now an assistant professor in Wageningen in the Netherlands in the Department of Social Sciences. There's another group of PhD students who came along after Rob, who did work very much like Rob's, looking at some aspect of Brazil in a fairly micro way. So Kim Bichino went to centers in Sao Paulo, in low-income neighborhoods, that dealt with women who were experiencing domestic violence. And she researched how religion helped them understand their experience of domestic violence. She is now a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Theology at Uppsala in Sweden. Then we had Fernando Odila Vasconcelos de Figueiredo, who had an amazing data set of federal civil servants in Brazil who had been who had undergone administrative processes for malfeasance of one kind or another. About 2/3 of them were investigated and punished for corruption. And she wanted to know how this kind of internal process of investigating and punishing people for corruption worked in the federal bureaucracy. She is now a European Research Council postdoctoral fellow in Bologna, researching anti-corruption investigations in various different countries, sort of a comparative approach. Joining her in the program was Roxana Pessoa Cavalcanti, who did a study of marginalized youth in 2 communities in Recife and how they perceived public security reform. She was kind of bringing, young people into the discussion of public sector reform. And she's now a lecturer in the criminology department. Sorry, it's a applied social science department in the University of Brighton. So these are all interdisciplinary research projects. They mix quantitative and qualitative analysis. They give voice. They sort of bring in the voice of people who are often not talked to, whose voice is often neglected. And as I say, they kind of look at the micro. Then we have another set of research projects that are much more macro. It's about Brazil in the world. How is Brazil's role in the world changing? So Thomas Fröhlich wrote a thesis on ethanol diplomacy on the part of Brazilian diplomats, and interviewed people like you, Mr. Ambassador, on sort of how Brazil was trying to scale up production of ethanol and have it recognized as a globally traded commodity. So he was coming out of an IR tradition, and Thomas is now an ESRC postdoctoral research fellow in war studies. Christoph Harrig was a researcher that Vinicius will remember very well, who looked at peacekeeping missions, army personnel who served in MINUSTA in Haiti in peacekeeping, but also served in guarantee of law and order operations domestically in Brazil, and how the experience of one influenced the experience of the other. And Christoph is now a research fellow at the Helmut Schmidt University in Hamburg. And Francisco, the next student I'm mentioning, was our first student in the joint PhD with USP. He's a guy called Francisco Urdinez. He's an Argentine, which I think reflects the internationalization of some Brazilian universities like USP. And he looked at how China increased its engagement with Latin America over the 2000s and the 2010s in the context of a region where relations with the US were very important. So he was trying to see how countries balance the influence of the US and balance the influence of China. And he's now an assistant professor at the Pontifical Catholic University in Santiago. And finally, I'm at the end of the list, but Ana Grimaldi, who's a colleague of mine, she's actually working with me as a teaching fellow in the module that I'm teaching this year. She wrote about Brazilian activists in transnational human rights networks in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. And so these students, they weren't just producing an output, a quote unquote output or a product. Their lives changed in this process of going to Brazil, engaging with Brazilian interlocutors. And of course, I haven't mentioned all of our many students who've gone back to Brazilian universities who were part of this transnational network. And they are now in the Netherlands and Sweden and Italy and Germany and Chile and the UK, doing research, practicing their craft, contributing to public debates. You know, they're not only ivory tower intellectuals, they're writing op-eds, they're giving interviews to journalists, and they're contributing. So I think when I think of what the legacy of the Brazil Institute can be, I think of these students whom I'm still in touch with, because that can be part of this process that the ambassador referred to of the internationalization of Brazilian social science, if you like, the sort of intermingling of Brazilians and non-Brazilians to raise questions about the country. So Vinicius mentioned the 4 research groups that will be rolled out on Friday. And I think those research groups are very important. I think much will be expected of them. They will be asked to think about what the big questions are in their area and what they could go about doing. And I don't think we can escape the fact that they will be expected to apply for research funding, because that is such an important part of the research landscape. And they will also have to go beyond their natural inclination to be sort of to be individual craftspeople, which is many of us in academia like to do that, to sit at home and to read what we want to read and to write what we want to write. But we also need to be part of teams, I think. And this is one of the contributions that I think Vinicius is bringing to the Brazil Institute, is to get us together in teams and to think about what we can do together. And I do think that another thing that we're being asked to do, because if you think about those academics that I mentioned, those PhD students I mentioned, they're all in, more or less, they're all in a disciplinary home, whether it's theology or criminology or political science. And so when we break down barriers, when we try to be interdisciplinary, so I'm working with a PhD student now, Daniel Buarque, who's taking ideas from psychology and trying to apply them to international relations. We're trying to blend these disciplines. We're not just trying to look separately from separate vantage points and saying that we're going to add these disciplinary perspectives in a kind of aggregative way. We're actually trying to change the disciplines we're involved with. And that's always a little bit risky, because ultimately most people end up having a foot in a discipline. And so they can't stray too far from the canons and the kind of conventions of that particular discipline. So let me talk a little bit about what the next 10 years could hold for the Brazil Institute. I'm very bad at predictions. I think most of the time when I've tried to predict, I've fallen flat on my face. So I will not try to commit any sort of hard and fast predictions here, but let me just say a few things about what kind of areas might be propitious. And I'm sure each of you in the different research groups have your own ideas. I think, Vinicius mentioned decolonizing the curriculum. I think there'll be probably important work that will be done on race and racial inequality of all types, actually. I think we can't really escape the continued rise of China, whatever our feelings are about it, whatever our views are about how that relationship will go between China and the rest of the world. I think if you just look at the growth figures for 2020, you'll see that China is one of the few countries in the world that grew in 2020. And so that rise will continue. And I think that's something that Francisco dealt with in his thesis, but we might have other students or other visitors working on that issue. And I think we also have, because the Brazil Institute is in the UK, we have some symmetry in the fact that both Brazil, I think, and Britain are changing somewhat their relationships to the rest of the region that they're in. So Brazil and South America, UK, vis-a-vis Europe. But let me talk a little bit about my own research group on governance, leadership, and democracy, because I think this is another very challenging area. And I have to confess that that I'm somewhat concerned about the state of democracy in the world today. I did my doctoral research a long time ago, and in that time, there was tremendous optimism about the transitions to democracy that were taking place. So people talk about the third wave, the so-called third wave, that began with the Portuguese Revolution in 1974, that included the fall of the communist regimes in Russia and Eastern Central Europe, and that involved some kind of movement away from authoritarian regimes in Latin America and Africa and Asia. And there was tremendous excitement about what democracy could bring and how people could operate within democratic institutions to change societies. And there were a lot of people like me at the time who were impatient with democracy as well. And we wanted to democratize democracy. And so my PhD thesis was called, and it was about rural trade unionists in Pernambuco, it was called Regime Change Without Democratization. Look at the conditions that these people work in, look at the poverty, look at the inequality, look at the difficulty of negotiating new contracts, enforcing contracts. So we wanted to democratize democracy. That seems a very long time ago. I think right now we're just trying to hang on to democracy, any form of democracy. If you look at the reports of research organizations that track the health of democracy in the world, such as the Democracy Matrix, VDEM, the Economist Intelligence Unit, the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, Freedom House. You look at any of those reports in the last few years, and it's very hard to escape the conclusion that there's been a democratic recession over the last few years. So we've seen how economic dislocation, stagnant living standards, rising inequality lead some people to condemn multilateralism, to demand purely nationalist solutions to economic and other problems. Even in the midst of a pandemic, if there's any problem that needs a global approach, it's got to be a pandemic. So we've seen rapid cultural change induce some people to sort of resurrect traditionalism and social conservatism, talk about getting our country back, talking about excluding people from the political community. And we've seen the rise of politicians who attack mainstream news outlets and use social media to whip up hardcore supporters by propagating misinformation. Unfortunately, I have to say, in my own field, in political science, mainstream theories have largely failed to foresee or explain this democratic recession. The mainstream theories for decades were based on rational actor models that assumed that individuals were rational utility maximizing units of calculation, if you like, that had robust access to accurate and standardized information and engaged in politics in ways that can be predicted by game theory and formal models. So in this kind of approach to politics, politics is about appealing to people's interests, and those are usually material interests, and creating broad majoritarian coalitions that can improve lives, sort of along the lines of the utilitarian maxim of the greatest good for the greatest number. And I'm not saying these approaches are completely useless. They tend to be very useful when there are repeated interactions in stable patterns within stable institutions and stable situations, equilibria, if you like. So voting in legislatures, for example. They're not very good for accounting for the rise of new political movements and ruptures in tradition and challenges to tradition. I would argue that these rational actor models of politics have failed in the same way that the rational expectations models in economics were seen to have failed after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. So because we need to understand these new forms of politics and whether or not they threaten democracy, that's why I'm helping to organize a conference with the Institute of Latin American Studies that's called Populism in Latin America and Beyond. And it's scheduled to take place on the 18th and 19th of March, electronically, online, purely online. And I have to say, being involved in this has been very interesting for me. And I'm not trying to suggest that there is one consensus view of what populism even means in this conference. What you find out very quickly from reading the literature that it means very different things to different researchers. It has very different traditions in different places. If you compare, for example, just the US and Latin America, in the US, it was a 19th century agrarian movement. And in Latin America, it's a post-World War II urban phenomenon largely. But I was really encouraged by something that came out of the organizing this conference. We put out a call for papers. We received dozens of really good proposals for research papers, some of them that were kind of in process and some of them were just prospective. We got a lot of really good proposals from Brazilians in Brazil at Brazilian universities, but also abroad. And interestingly, these papers were not just about Brazil. They were about Spain, about Italy, about the Philippines, about the US, about Western Europe. And I was really impressed by the confidence and the reach of these researchers to see that Brazilian social scientists really are kind of reaching out and contributing to a global debate about important phenomenon. And that gives me a lot of optimism, because in some ways, the Brazil Institute, we're just sort of junior partners of this larger phenomenon, which is Brazilian academia, if you like, Brazilian scholarship. So I hope, as I say, this partial perspective that I have isn't everyone's view of the Brazil Institute. So, and I will let people give their own perspective on this. We can't meet physically. We're going to have one heck of a big party, I think, when we finally can get together physically. But I think the community is still there. And one of the things I did to prepare for this presentation is I read some of the acknowledgements in these PhD theses that I've told you about. And they're all acknowledging people, fellow students and academics in the Institute. That community is there. The community is still there, even though we're only meeting online. So we have our regular seminar series where people present the research. That is a sign, I think, that we still have this community. We have to work a little harder to keep it going. But it's there. And I want to end just by quoting another academic. You see, I've given a very academic talk here. I've been true to myself. But before he died, supposedly, Sir Isaac Newton wrote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all discovered before me." Sorry, lay all undiscovered before me. Now, if Isaac Newton wrote that about himself, imagine what we have to describe, how humble we have to be in describing ourselves and what we are doing. And to mix the metaphor a bit, maybe it's not an ocean of truth, maybe it's a river of truth, like the Thames. Maybe it's a little bit polluted. It has its highs and lows, but it's still big and powerful, and there's a lot to do. There is a lot that we can do together out there on this ocean of truth, or this river of truth. So let's move forward in the next 10 years of the Brazil Institute. I look forward to moving forward with you, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I'm sure that if you were now in an auditorium, you getting a huge applause of everyone in this audience. Thank you so much for this recovering the memory of the Institute in some ways, and provoking us to think how much the research that has been developed in the Institute. It also helped to provoke to create a community around thinking about Brazil, with Brazil, and from Brazilian perspectives. Again, that's, I think, is immense and amazing what you have done as founder of the Institute and as the director for all those years. For the audience, we have a Q&A part here that you can write your questions or comments to Anthony. While you do that, I would like to mention also three of our colleagues that we should be thankful to them always. Leslie Bethel, who have been with us for quite a long time as a visitor professor, and two very, very special friends and colleagues of us, Jeff Garmany, who now is in Australia, and Sonia Delindro Gonçalves, who is now in Rome. Both of them were here when I started at King's, and also they made me feel part of a community together with Anthony. And we shared a lot of good ideas and a good friendship among all of us. So I would like to express my gratitude to them also, even not being with us here. Please, if you have questions or comments, write in our Q&A. We have still time for that. Normally, after lectures like that in the opening events of Brazil Institute, we would have, actually the Brazil Week, we would have a performance of Brazil Ensemble that we don't have this year. I thought that I could play some solo for you, but I will save you from this suffering, and then we can wait for the next performance of the Brazil Ensemble when we can join again together. So if you have questions, please just write there in our Q&A. Well, apparently our audience has no questions to bring to us here, but Anthony, you probably are still there. I just want to, okay, we have one here. Felipe just wrote, can Anthony say something about the current interest on Brazilian studies in academic publishing? May something about the last book, your own book, no, Modern Brazil.
Thanks for the question, Felipe. Yeah, I think that book came about partly because people would ask me, you know, well, I'd meet people, for example, oh, I'm being relocated to Brazil for my company, or I'm a diplomat and I'm going to Brazil to work in the embassy, British embassy. You know, what can I read? And it sounds very immodest that I would say, oh, I've got to write a book to respond to that need. But what we found, actually, I remember when I first came to London, the embassy at the time had a little booklet of 50 important works by Brazilians about Brazil. And one of the things we found out was that very few of them had been translated. You know, so there's all this rich work about kind of the national question, if you like, you know, written by all these eminent academics, and yet very few. I think in 2010, even Raízes do Brasil hadn't been translated into English. I think it was subsequently in 2012. But so there did seem to be this need for something short and introductory for people who want to do something with or for Brazil. And so when I had the opportunity with Oxford University Press to write something like that, I actually accepted it very arrogantly, thinking, oh, this will be the easiest book I'll ever write. It's just all the stuff I've been teaching for the last 10 years. And it was actually probably the most difficult thing I ever did, because I had to keep cutting. And so my excuse is also, if you read it and think, well, why didn't he talk about that? Well, it was probably in the earlier version, and I had to cut it because of my diabolical editors. But I think Vinicius might want to come in here because he's a series editor for Anthem Press. And because he's associated with Brasiliana, he probably knows better than I do what sort of thing is being produced in that area. Vinicius?
Yes, Anthony, thank you. Well, I think what the good about Brazil is what you said. Every time and everywhere we touch, we still have a lot of new things to say about. We still have a lot of things to discover and to research. And what we could see also a few years ago, we created the Brazilian Studies Association in Europe, ABRE, and we had 2 conferences, and the amount of people that came and were producing research about Brazil and publishing about Brazil, it's amazing to see. You know? So we could see that in Brasiliana in the first years, very small approach to publish with us, and then suddenly Brasiliana became a giant journal indeed, and Felipe is continuing this work now there. The Brazilian Studies series in Anthem, I think for a specific country like Brazil, in 1 year we get already 3 volumes, and it's important to say some of those volumes from people from our community. You know, David Trees from this Plaza is one of these authors. Felipe Botelho is one of those authors. So we can see this community rich, producing, and the editorial market is there also looking for things like that. We should mention also about the classics not translated. We've been discussing about the next year, the 100 years of Brazilian Modern Art Week. And many of the classics of that period are still not translated to English. So it means there is still a space to populate more the English language editorial world with works from Brazilians, from classic authors that help to create what we call Brazilian studies. So we have here also, Anthony, Fernanda Aguilar Perez. Congrats to King's Brazil Institute. So many amazing accomplishments in those 10 years. Glad to be part of it. And we are very proud that you are part of our community, Fernanda. Thank you so much. Also a message from Janina Onuk. I would like to congratulate for the 10 years of Brazil Institute. I congratulate the work of Professor Anthony for leading this very important initiative for Brazilian researchers and scholars interested in Brazil. I would like to thank Anthony and Vinicius for the partnership with USP. Un abraço, Janina, Iri. Thank you so much, Janina. Your partnership is fundamental for us. We have another question, Anthony. I will borrow Anthony's question. Helen Jones asked, would anyone start a Brazil Institute now? Why or why not?
Should I have a go at that, Vinicius? Well, I mean, one of the things, if you're working in public health, for example, you probably notice that, you know, two of the important research institutes working on the vaccine, Butantan and Fiocruz, are based in Brazil. So if you're in that particular area, you might say, hey, Brazil's really, really important in this. If you're, I don't know, if you're looking at environmental issues, if you're looking at other issues, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, 2010 was this kind of moment of euphoria, some of it somewhat artificial, I would say. But I'm not sure. I do think that what you see is that the existing institutions have gone into new areas. You know, we've seen the Wilson Center in Washington. We've seen some of the European institutes, you know, changing in terms of what they're researching on. What do you think, Vinicius?
Well, Anthony, that's always a difficult question to answer, no? And we could play a little bit like, well, I hope that they will not create another Brazil Institute now, so we can continue to be on the forefront for that. But I think any time it's a momentum to create an institute focused on a specific country, especially in a country like Brazil, due to its plurality, due to this, as we said here, we still have a lot to discuss with Brazilians and about Brazil. So anytime that an institution wants to focus specifically about Brazil, not because I am personally Brazilian or a Brazilianist, but because it could be the same about any other country in the world. But I think it's important to not forget that we have a tendency sometimes to try to generalize we used to discuss a lot about that. Brazil and Latin America, if we look close, if we put our zoom closer, of course we have a lot in common with Latin America, as well as we have with Africa, with Europe, with the planet. But we should never forget to look at the specificities of countries. And therefore, I think if the question is there a political momentum to create a political momentum to create an institute like that? Again, in one side or another, positively or negatively, it's always a momentum to start to study closely a country. Anthony, I will move to the next question that was an internal one. James asked, I was going to say if you need a UK question here. And he says, does Anthony and the panel think understanding of Brazil has grown in the UK over the last 10 years, in particular among British politicians?
That's, I don't think I know enough politicians to really respond to that. I would say in terms of the general population, there might have been some tendency towards greater understanding. I was actually surprised. Last year we had Perry Anderson come to King's, and Perry Anderson is a very grand figure who was editor of Marxism Today, and he's kind of one of these intellectuals who wants to write about big topics. And he has a book on the US, and he has a book on India, and he has a book on China. And, he felt the need to write a book on Brazil. So I do think some awareness is growing, and some knowledge of the complexities are growing. There's still a tendency, when you have a story about Brazil, even in a kind of financial newspaper, and it's about the stock market, to put pictures of Escola de Samba, or, so there's this tendency to fall back on cliches, and Daniel Barkey, our student, wrote about that in his master's. But I think some awareness has increased. I think there is more awareness. Maybe I'm just deluded because I've been involved in trying to, spread that awareness over the past few years. But I do think what you said at the end there is very important, that most universities in the UK and elsewhere would cover Brazil as part of Latin America. They wouldn't have they wouldn't risk having just an institute or a center just about Brazil. They would tend to want to subsume it under a regional banner because they think, well, it's not important enough on its own. And I think the fact that we can exist, that gives us some advantages that I think that programs that are in that larger regional orbit don't have. We can do some interesting things that they are a little bit buried under these other layers. And Brazil will never be as big as China and India. Those are the behemoths that everybody in universities wants to cover, because they're the mega nation states amongst the emerging countries. But I think to have Brazil in there is really useful.
If I may, Anthony, I just would like to mention also that since at least I started in the Institute, the level of interaction that the Institute has with FCO and now FCDO, and also with the MOD, providing knowledge and providing inputs about Brazil, it's quite important and relevant. And I think I don't know how to measure that, if we can really measure how much influence it was possible to see in the transformation of perceptions about Brazil. But I think in these 10 years, this role played by the Institute was definitely also acknowledged by those institutions and UK government in inviting us to talk about Brazil to their personnel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, we have another question here from Jonathan Schultz-Fully. Is there any representative of the Brazil Institute in Rio de Janeiro, in case an undergraduate students want to study at the Brazil Institute in the near future? Well, if there is a place there, I think I would be the first volunteer.
We used to have a representative of King's in Rio, remember, a few years ago. We don't now. Yeah. Well,
I would recommend, Jonathan, to keep in contact with Brazil Institute, keep looking at our webpage and the events that we have. And if you have any particular doubt or issue, contact us also. Or if you know someone who is interested in study at Brazil Institute, put us in touch. It will be always a pleasure to interact with other colleagues. No? Danilo Rothberg asked Anthony, congratulations and thanks to Anthony and Vinicius for your views on the rich trajectory of the Brazil Institute. I would be pleased to know which are, from your perspective, the main topics of attention in the near future worthy of researching and studying in the Institute. Anthony?
Yeah, so I mentioned some of them at the end of my talk. I think the question of democracy, how that's changed. I think you had a long period of kind of consensus and stability between 1995 and 2010, and that's gone. And so now people are arguing about, what the threats are, what can be done. I think, as I said, China is a very important issue in international relations, I think, for Brazil, because it is Brazil's most important trade partner. And yet at the same time, the US is still a major trade partner. It's number 2. And so I think Brazil has a particularly strong interest in trying to see some degree of integration of the world and not a descent into polarization and some kind of Cold War or pseudo Cold War between the United States and China. I would say the issue of inequality is very important. I know that Octavio Ferraz in the law school has a very interesting project on inequality. And so, his area of research is access to health and how people in Brazil can use the judicial system to get treatment from the SUS, from the public health system. So that's a health inequality, but he's also interested in other aspects: income, region, gender, race, ethnicity. Those are all, I think, on the agenda for research. I'm sure I'm going to forget some of these areas that come out when we speak to students. I think sustainability is a huge one. I've been teaching an intro to development, international development in the development department. And a lot of the students really get interested in not just sort of global attempts to mitigate and adapt to climate change, but sort of what's going on the ground in different countries, how countries are trying to convert to low carbon emissions and eventually zero carbon emissions. I mean, I think that's the goal of the next few decades, is to get to zero carbon. And, Brazil's part of that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of really important areas, and it's always frustrating when we talk about these things because we're so small. We can do some of it, and we can certainly point the way to other people outside of Kings who are doing some of it. But I always feel like, that Isaac Newton quote, we're sort of fiddling around with pebbles, and there's this massive amount of research that could be done.
If I may, Anthony, I would also mention the question of environmental security and natural resources governance, topics that are extremely relevant for Brazil, alternative energies. I think we should look at this aspect also in Brazil Institute. We have that in our focus of agenda. The question of inequality, as you mentioned, I think is very connected to the idea of decolonizing curricula. We have in Brazil several epistemologies from original people cultures, and also with Afro descendants, quilombolas. So I think these are aspects that we should look also for this future and be researching it more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another thing too, and this is more of a methodological thing rather than an area, but Brazil is a very big producer of data, about itself. I mean, IBGE, IPEA, there's a tremendous amount of pretty reliable data that, you need a sort of quantitative approach to process, and we could, that could be a part of the research that could be done in greater volume.
Excellent. Well, Robert Coates wrote also here a question that I think we already addressed. No, he's asking about the environmental ecological change, Brazil's role in the world in this respect, including land change and decline in Brazil must also be central. Yes, you are right, Rob. And he say, nice to be mentioned as a disaster PhD, by the way, Anthony. Thanks, Robert, to be with us here. Joseph Milhan said, it's been fantastic to hear about the research produced by the members of the Institute, but I wonder if you could say something about how KBI continues to contribute to postgraduate teaching on Brazilian studies, asking a proud graduate of the MA Brazil Global Perspective. Thanks, Joe. We are teaching some modules to the Master in Global Affairs. It's a joint master among the global institutes. So Brazil Institute is a core part of it. And we dedicate a big amount of our efforts in teaching to support this new master program, putting together the global institutes with portions of Brazil there. So yeah, this teaching in master level is still there. So yeah. Kevin Fleming also, hi Vinicius, Anthony, and Ambassador Fred, congratulations on your anniversary and congratulations on the excellent book, Anthony. I read when I returned home to UK after 4 years in Brasilia. I wish you had finished it before I moved to Brazil.
Why would it take too long?
With the change in US president, how do you think that will change the political landscape in Brazil, if at all? That's for you, Anthony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, Trump losing takes the wind out of the sails of the president a little bit. I think it probably makes him worry about his reelection chances. The fact that in a democracy that's had over 200 years of elections and has fairly strong institutions, you got a group of people going into the Capitol building in the way that they did, I think has got people in Brazil thinking, ooh, could that happen here? So I think there's some debate about if there was some version of that to happen, how might that happen? But I think, Trumpism is still there in the United States. He got a lot of votes. The party is now divided. I think what's interesting about the Republican Party dilemma is that no position they can take is going to satisfy the different elements of the coalition in that party. So they're divided. And I think you may see some similar division in the support base for the government as we approach 2022. So I think there are a lot of intriguing parallels, but then as you would insist on, I think, Vinicius, there are also distinctive elements. For example, I don't see an equivalent to the militias that you see in the United States in Brazil, but there's considerable support for the president in the military police, for example, and that could potentially be exploited. But getting back to the master's teaching, I just wanted to say, because this is kind of unusual, and you might think that I'm telling lies here, but I had over 50 students in my master's module on contemporary Brazil last term. Some of them are hostages. I did have this, actually not last year, but the year before, a Nepalese journalist who said, I didn't want to study Brazil, but I couldn't get into the China course, so I had to take your module. But then he said, I was really interested in it. I found all these parallels to stuff I'm writing about in Nepal. And that's always gratifying when someone who didn't really want to do it ends up telling you they enjoyed it. But over 50 students at the master's level. I'd never thought before that, I'd never had that many, and that's showing, I think, that there's this kind of, that there's this growing interest, and there's a kind of like the metaphor we always used to use, Vinicius, of the bridge. We've got Brazilians coming across the bridge, and then we've got non-Brazilians sort of meeting there and saying, how do we learn from each other? So I think that's very gratifying, and I hope those numbers keep up. I don't know if that's a blip, because I went from about 30 to 52. And I don't know if it'll be back down to 30 next year or somewhere in that region, but there is interest at the master's level. And those of you who might be listening who took the master's in Brazilian global affairs, there still is master's teaching on Brazil at King's, even though that particular master's, that particular form of it doesn't exist.
Thanks, Anthony. Andrew, I will return to your question very soon. I will just bring the two after and put them together. Kevin and Felipe both asked what might be the impact of UK-Brazil relationship, and Felipe asked the ambassador if he can say something about UK-Brazil relations after Brexit, and any comments about the near future. So I think these two questions come together here about UK-Brazil relations. So please, perhaps, Ambassador, could you start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Philippe, for asking this question. First of all, I must confess that I feel a bit uncomfortable in sharing this table with two academics as yourself. I mean, I'm not an academic myself. I studied economics and then did my doctorate in our diplomacy school, mostly about my experience, professional experience. I wrote about parliamentary diplomacy, about foreign policy and Congress in Brazil, specifically on the Brazilian Senate. But and I feel uncomfortable to talk when my internet connection is very unstable, so I missed some of what you just said. But I think I heard someone asking about the interest of UK parliamentarians in Brazil or politicians in Brazil.
Exactly.
And I just would like to add that this year we reconvened the APPG, the All Parliamentarian Group, Brazil UK Parliamentary Group, Friendship Group, with 18 members, which is much more than we had in the past. I mean, in 2020, the group wasn't convened. So this is very interesting to know that Brazil is still a matter of a subject of interest in the UK Parliament. And every day I follow the debates in Parliament, and I see many interventions about Brazil, what's going on in Brazil. And I have many politicians here in my residence, not now, of course, but before the pandemic, to lunch and discuss what's going on in both countries and how can we improve the relations. So going to specifically what Felipe has asked about about UK-Brazil relations after Brexit. You know, let me start by saying that Brazil and the UK are good old friends. This is, we have no irritants. We share converging views in many items of the international agenda. And one of my main instructions when I was designated ambassador here in the UK was to get Brazil prepared for Brexit. How, you know, we have this net of bilateral agreements with the EU and the UK. So we had to revisit all of 100 and more than 100 agreements regulating all sorts of, you know, parts of our day-to-day relation. So to make sure that there won't be any gap in the relations after Brexit. Of course, Brexit is done. And the good news is that our relations haven't been affected as much as we thought. We still have 3 or 4 minor agreements in terms of trade access, 2 or 3 products that we need to rediscuss the trade-related quotas. But this will be discussed in the WTO in Geneva, not here. Basically, I think we've done our work. But of course, we need to look beyond Brexit. What will be our relations now? And I think we could, both countries profit if we could start as soon as possible negotiations on a free trade agreement between the 2 countries. Of course, that won't be easy. We have but we won't start from scratch. I mean, we have this EU-Mercosur agreement that could serve as a basis for what we need next. Of course, it won't be easy because we need to negotiate with our friends of Mercosur, and we understand there are some political issues with one of the members of Mercosur. But again, I think Brazil is a powerhouse in producing agricultural products, and the UK imports half of the food it consumes. So I see a great opportunity there. Let me also review here that my second instruction was, the first one was get Brazil ready for Brexit. Second was attract as much as investment as it could. And third, please protect our agribusiness sector, because this is very important. We do it very good at agriculture, and so that's it. I mean, how I see the UK-Brazil relations after Brexit, excellent. But we have room to move forward. I mean, I think it would be better if we could start negotiating a new free trade agreement as soon as we can.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thanks for return also to the question about the understanding of Brazil among politicians here. I think it was fantastic that you could bring and enrich our perception here on this matter. Anthony, would you like to add something here?
No, just that it sounds very encouraging that the APBG in Parliament has 18 people. I mean, I've been to several of those meetings, and I've never seen it 18. So that's very good news, and I think there's some real opportunities there.
So we have a last question here, Anthony, from Andrew Crawford. Every country is developing a high dependence on China for trade, especially Brazilian agribusiness. How will Brazil control China inward investment into Brazil to ensure that Brazil maintains its independence and ownership in key economic sectors, which guarantee Brazilian national security, independence, and identity? Anthony, it's a very good question. I would like to ask if you could type the answer instead of answer it to us, because we are coming close to the end of our time here. And we need to conclude. Unfortunately, sorry, Andrew, for that, but Anthony will type that and answer your question there. I will try to summarize and bring to the end of our evening here. Again, I would like to ask to thank the ambassador for being with us and for your kind words about the Institute and enriching our debate here. Anthony, I would like to thank you so much for not only this lecture, but for this friendship, for this mentorship, for your leadership and guidance for Brazil Institute. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for contributing to Brazil Institute. Brazil Institute, it's not an individual endeavor, it's a collaborative, it's a collective work. And I would like to thank all of you that has been contributing to Brazil Institute to make these 10 years happen and to assure the future of Brazil Institute. So I just would like to say that this year, unfortunately, we don't have a cachaça workshop, but I have mine here. I just would like to taste Brazil Institute for more 10, 20, 30 years for Brazil Institute. Thanks everybody again. Stay tuned for our next events in Brazil Week and for what's to come in Brazil Institute.